Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. This is a really fantastic moment, and I think that everyone here realizes we have an enormous opportunity to do a tremendous amount of good. And I'm glad that there's so many intelligent, ethical people in the audience that are willing to take practical steps and to simply stop discussing it. Because ultimately, we don't have the luxury of waiting. Enough is enough. People are suffering, and they have been for a very long time. People in Puerto Rico are still suffering, and around the world, people are suffering in economically undeveloped areas, and we have the tools to take care of it. And importantly, it's a global phenomenon. The world is changing rapidly. We no longer understand the world that we are in. Things are getting more chaotic and stranger. Despite economic gains in technology and standards of living, the world has become a stranger and darker place. Old institutions no longer seem fit for the job, and they were built in a time where technology and economics and social relations were fundamentally different. But this isn't the fault of any individual or group or country. It's a consequence of a political system that is centralized and large. They are not nimble enough to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. We need to be able to experiment in order to deal with these new challenges. Consequently, because of this large centralization and lack of experimentation, citizens and leaders alike have thrown up their hands. We know the problems, but the system does not allow it. We're baffled that we live longer and have infinite information at our fingertips, but we do not have control over the most fundamental values humans have: freedom, equality, justice. These things are outside of our grasp, despite having the power. As a result, we've been increasingly angered, and we dehumanize each other over politics. Because of our current governmental system is based on tribes, we've become polarized based on party or ideology. We have forgotten our shared humanity, our values, and public life outside of politics. It has slowly replaced our existing institutions. A person's identity is increasingly more tied to the arguments they make than their character or what they do in the world. But this isn't the beginning of the end. It is the end of the beginning. Because of abundant information and exponential technologies such as AI, biomedical research, AR and VR, renewable technologies, we have the opportunity to create a heaven on earth, a city on a hill. But this isn't a utopian statement. It's a practical point. 100 years ago, compared to now, we're living as the richest kings possible. But that does not mean we should not come in with a clear head, and we should not look at existing institutions and best practices. We cannot be purely utopian. We cannot be looking into the clouds. We must not forget what underlies society's ability to change: governance. We're able to interact with one another because there are rules. Rules that are rightly set and expectations are met. And if you create the correct rule set, you can create a society that can thrive. Ultimately, a person will not do business unless they know that they will get a return in the future or they will not be cheated. Likewise, in social relations, you won't enter a relationship with someone unless you know there's reciprocity. What experimentation in government allows is to allow different forms of rule sets that are better geared towards the 21st century. By grace of being alive right now, we have the tools to change this. Blockchain technology has been a buzzword, admittedly, but it has the fundamental power to change how we do rules in this world. It provides technology to transparently govern, reduce transaction costs of third-party institutions, and to automatically execute contracts among individuals. While we must work in tandem with existing institutions, these distributed ledger technologies provide an avenue to create an alternative system. But blockchain technology is one aspect of the coin of governance. One thing that's been happening, as Tom W. Bell calls, is a quiet revolution. For the last 70 years, special economic zones and experimental societies have grown from nothing. Cities such as Shenzhen, Dubai, and Singapore rose from nothing purely or largely because of the rule sets they employ. And fundamentally, there is a new wave of these innovations. This new wave is more experimental. It's trying harder. But the problem is they work in isolation. They see themselves as the only experiments out there. They keep committing the same problems as before. They don't share resources or capital or trust. Consequently, they often fail. So the biggest problem we saw when looking at this movement is that they didn't see themselves as a movement. They didn't see themselves as a whole. So we did something seemingly silly. We made up a word. We made up a word that was general and broad. It can bring together the people in this room, people who are interested in special economic zones, or in city-states, or in communes, or intentional communities and eco-villages, because they share a fundamental thing, and it's the definition of a startup society. Any form of experimental government located in a small geographic area. But a word by itself doesn't do anything. Ultimately, there needs to be an institution that facilitates this network, and that's why we created the foundation. We created the foundation so we could connect these different projects together through academic studies, popular content, and conferences. Recently, we opened the Institute for Competitive Governance that focuses more on the policy and academic aspects. And these conferences are a way to jumpstart, I don't want to say activism, maybe hacktivism would be a better word, because we're acting, we're not arguing. But the word, it's important for a couple of reasons. It's an analog to how it is similar to a startup. A startup is small, it is nimble, it changes with the time, and is based on the customer's needs. Likewise, a startup society is small, it is local because it is small and responsive to people's needs. But it's different in one fundamental way. Unlike a startup, you cannot start a startup society in a garage. There are near infinite vectors in building a city, infinite amount of people and organizations and industries required to build it, and expertise. And that's why the fundamental role of the Startup Society's Foundation is to form consortiums, alliances of different people with different skill sets and abilities. The purpose of this consortium is to first instill trust. Many startup societies for the longest time have been single individuals or isolated groups that have not expressed trust to the people that they're trying to help. And because of that, they're not world-trusted NGOs or organizations with a track record. They simply, out of hand, discard them because of why should they trust them? Second, there needs to be expertise. It can't be one group that's building a city. There needs to be infrastructure, needs to be policy, investment, new technologies. And that's why we need a consortium of policymakers, investors, blockchain entrepreneurs, and any other people that are interested in building cities. And thankfully, we're already starting this consortium. As you can see from our partners up here, we have many people related to blockchain field, people who are related to policy, people who are building seasteads, and most importantly, people in Puerto Rico. In order to have this consortium, it needs to be led and for the benefit of the local population. Ultimately, if it isn't, it shouldn't exist. And we're lucky that about half of our partners are Puerto Rican organizations. So why Puerto Rico? So there's plenty of reasons. For one, these gains I was talking about economically, they are not evenly distributed. And in Puerto Rico, that's abundantly clear. Despite being American citizens, they're living in poverty. Puerto Rico has been absolutely devastated by the hurricane. Their infrastructure is fundamentally destroyed. I mean, a couple weeks ago, they experienced another island-wide blackout. That's completely unacceptable. If that was in any other part of the United States, there would be riots in the street. Also, Puerto Rico, even prior to the hurricane, experienced very poor governance. If you look at the World Bank Ease of Doing Business, they fail on the most fundamental aspects of economic growth, such as enforcing contracts and registering property. And because of that, people don't want to do business there. And while they do have the benefit of Act 20 and Act 22 benefits, that allows American citizens to come there with lower income taxes, ultimately, when you look at the special economic zone and economic literature, you find that that's not the real crux of the problem. You can lower taxes and you can have people park money there, but ultimately, the thing that causes economic growth and prosperity is when people can set up their businesses there. They can realize, okay, I can easily and concisely register a company and realize that I will get returns out of it. And currently, that's not the case. And importantly, special economic zones are not new to Puerto Rico. In fact, this is actually not widely known. Puerto Rico was the first place to host a modern-day special economic zone in 1948 under Operation Bootstrap, and has foreign trade zones that currently exist there. This is not simply a fantasy, this is already practice. It's just a question of scaling. And ultimately, the fundamental reason why these things matter is because they are American citizens. They're people, and we have the power to take care of it. and nothing that we've done has helped at this point. So that has to be completely in the front of people's minds when taking care of this. It should not be purely economic gain or virtue signaling. It has to be for Puerto Ricans and for the benefit of Puerto Ricans. And that's why I'm going to emphasize this point. If we don't have Puerto Ricans involved in this, it should not exist. This is their story, and this is their land, and they have to write their own story. We can't just be seen as people that are trying to change the system from the outside. It's theirs. And because of our ethical obligation, we no longer have the luxury of simply entertaining ourselves on social media by virtue signaling how ethically better we are and how our ideas are so much more pure. Ultimately, that hasn't done anything, and it won't continue to do anything. The only thing that will change is when we stop our bickering and realize that we all have the ability to change things. The era of argumentation is over. It's time to build. Everyone, welcome to the Startup Society Summit.